Hello, EGO 201 students. I just wanted to take some time to give you all some tips on Milestone 1. This video will be on the introduction only. You will still have to write another section on the history and overview of the firm you chose. But let's take some time to first talk about the introduction. The important reason I wanted to do that is there are just a lot of common mistakes people make in writing the introduction. So I want to talk about those to make sure you can avoid those as you're working on this assignment. The first thing, most common thing, is forgetting to write an introduction at all and starting with the history and overview, thinking that does introduce your paper. And that is not enough. You do have to write a separate introduction. Another thing people miss is writing an introduction that does not have a clear purpose. So make sure you clearly state your purpose in your introduction. Also, another thing I see a lot is writing an introduction that has a purpose, but it is not the assigned purpose. So I'll get introductions, you pick a firm that you probably like. A lot of people will pick Starbucks, and they talk about how their purpose is showing what a great environmentally friendly company Starbucks is, and that's great, but this paper has very specific guidelines, and that is not the purpose of what you want to write about here. Another mistake people make is writing an introduction that only introduces one or two of the 3 milestones that you put together in your final paper. So you do want to make sure you are introducing your entire paper here. And one of the things that holds people back from getting started on this assignment is that you think you need to have a conclusion before you start. And you do not. In fact, if you have a conclusion, you should take it out, because the purpose of this is to do this research and then come to your conclusion. So it's fine to have it in your final paper if you want to add on to your introduction and have some of your findings there. That's great. But for Milestone 1, you should not have a conclusion before you get started. The most important thing you should do before submitting any assignment is to know how it will be graded so that you can best prepare. So taking a look at your rubric, you want to make sure you understand how this introduction will be graded. And you'll see there is 3 different scores you could earn, and proficient, which will give you 100% of the 30 points total on Milestone 1. Needs improvement would only give you 75%, and if you do not do the introduction at all, which I said is a very common mistake, unfortunately you earn a 0 for this critical element. So you really want to understand how it will be graded. You also want to make sure that you meet the submission guidelines. You should be turning in a 1 to 2 page Microsoft Word document, which should be .doc or .docx. Please do not submit PDF files, .pages, etc. The .pages especially I cannot view, but for the ease of my grading and me not having to hunt you down to get you to submit the proper file, please make sure you're using Microsoft Word. Also using 12-point New Roman font, and your citation should be in APA format. The best way to really make sure that you're doing this assignment according to the guidelines is to go ahead and, if you're in the assignment guidelines and rubric section of Brightspace, what you want to look at is called the final paper guide. And that looks like this, and basically it has the template you need for what you should be submitting, the title, the format. It even has a little bit on each section of your paper. And even at the end, it will show you more about how to do your references and APA format. So that's a great thing to use when you're writing. For the introduction, there is a sample paper posted, which is over here in this section. However, I caution against using it for the introduction portion, because the rubric for this paper used to be a lot more vague, and the sample paper is old from old guidelines, and so I don't think it necessarily fits well with how I have to grade your introduction. So I would be careful using that there. But you will see, again, going back to this rubric, I've outlined in red that one, you need to show the purpose, and you need to explain how you're going to inform the conclusion. Not come to a conclusion. As I said before, you're not going to tell me what your conclusion is. You should not know that yet at this point in time. But that just means tell me what you're going to look at in order to eventually reach your conclusion. So again, remember, you are a consultant for the firm that you chose. You will analyze a variety of microeconomic concepts in order to make recommendations for your firm to sustain success going forward. So that's just the core purpose, and there's a lot of different ways you can say that, but you want to make sure that you're conveying that information. And also, how you're going to inform the conclusion is that you want to mention the topics that you are going to cover in order to reach your recommendations. So this is where it's important that you're talking about all the topics from Milestone 1, Milestone 2, and Milestone 3. And where you can find a good idea of that, again, is on this, the final paper. So all your critical elements here are what you're going to be talking about and will be evaluated on. So that's how you will ultimately form your conclusion. Also, another thing I like to do when I'm giving you feedback, it's in your best interest anyway to try to hit the exemplary, even though your milestones aren't judged on that. Like, looking back, your milestones can be proficient, needs improvement, or not evident. But on your final, there will be 4 categories: exemplary, proficient, needs improvement, and not evident. So you want to make sure you're taking things up to the exemplary standards so that my feedback can be more relevant, and you know if you have more changes that you will need to make going from milestone to the final paper. So with the introduction, there's not a whole lot of difference. It's just saying you need to use industry-specific language to establish expertise. So your introduction can be a little more simple, and you could still get a proficient on milestone 1, but you do need to use that language on your final paper. And it's important to know that even if you score a 100% proficient on milestone 1, if you're not using that industry-specific language, that section or that element would only earn an 85% on the final paper. Along those lines, if you scored needs improvement on your introduction and you decided, I'm not going to make any changes, 75% is good enough for me, well, on the final paper, that's only going to earn a 55%. So you want to make sure you try to make all the recommended improvements that you'll see in the feedback I will give you on your milestones. And then here I have a sample introduction, and you can actually open this PowerPoint file to just take a longer, closer look at it. But it's important here. I have some industry terminology in italics, and then I have the underlined, the purpose statement, and how you'll inform the conclusion, because that is really the core. That's what you need to get a proficient. And so you'll want to make sure you have something along those lines. You'll notice as a consultant, I mentioned that, right? That's your purpose. You're a consultant that was hired. So you're going to examine the core microeconomic principles to ensure your firm's sustainability and future growth in the market. So what am I looking at? This paper will examine supply and demand conditions, including trends in demand and the price elasticity of demand. You'll also, this is the stuff that's in milestone 3, talking about the cost of production, market share, barriers to entry, and the market structure of the chocolate industry. So here, when you're using this industry terminology, you want to make sure you use it correctly. So I've had people before try to say, oh, I don't want to seem like I'm sticking too much to the exact guidelines. I don't want to put it in my own words. Please do not use the thesaurus on the industry terminology. When people tell me about price flexibility of demand, that's not right. That's not what we're talking about. Price elasticity is a concept. So you want to make sure you're using terminology correctly here. And other than that, then this just shows after completing all those topics you're analyzing, that's how you're going to come up with your recommendations. So again, you're not saying what your recommendations are. You can on the final paper when you have them, but milestone 1 and even on the final paper, that's not required. So just make sure that you're doing these things, and hopefully you'll do really well on milestone 1.